Hello and welcome to Low-Code Campfire. This is episode number 237 for March 27, 2026. I am Dale Warner, head of support for Plantanet, and we're glad you're here. This is an event that we do most Fridays, 10 a.m. Central Time, and it's an opportunity to get together and share what you're doing with low-code with us, get some help along the way, maybe give some help as well. We record all of them, put them on YouTube, so you can get to them, youtube.com/plantapp. Lots of good content there. We'll run this agenda. We'll stop and say hello because we're a friendly group, and then we'll go around the campfire. Anything that you want to talk about is called first call, and we'll do that first. And then anything that got submitted in advance, which there was nothing this week. And then we'll touch on some of these other areas. After an hour or so, we'll go into Afterglow. That's where we turn off the recording, raise a virtual adult beverage, and begin to enjoy the weekend and each other for a little while longer. So please do engage with us. You can submit questions, topics in advance, support@plantapp.com. If you'll put something out there, I'll do a little bit of research, put it on the agenda, and we can talk about it when we get here. Hello, everyone. I feel like I rushed that a little bit, but I get like I say it too often. Hello.
Good
Hey,
morning.
Mhm.
hello.
Hello.
So with that, what do we have a first call? First call for problems, suggestions, questions, answers. What do you have? It's going to be a short hour.
I'm going to start off with a first comment, if I may.
Okay, good.
So on Wednesday, Dale, you demonstrated your contribution for voice to text, and I just wanted to say that is right up my alley. I'll be planning on using that very soon. I'm looking forward to that.
Good. I thought I would. I'll show it here as well in a little bit, but this is one of those things. It amazes me. Our team, I'm sure, developed this. I found that when we had a client ask about this, how can I engage the browser and Microsoft and all already know how to do this, but and they had a very simple HTML only implementation proving to me, hey, this thing works, but you can't just drop it into action form and get it to work. So that was really the question. Before I spend all this time trying to figure out how to get it to work with action form, can you give me any pointers? And I went to our team and found out that somebody a couple of years ago had done this work in action form. And the part that amazes me, I mean, I didn't know that the browser would know how to do that or yeah, but also that, we have these partial solutions lying around, these nice working pieces that um, we haven't made public, right? Anyway, I was very glad to find that we had it, drop it into a contribution. You guys can consume it with, 10 minutes work instead of 2 hours work. And that's to me, what makes the low code world go around, which is another way of saying I wish all the things that we have figured out, I don't even know what they are, but I wish they were all in our contribution website. Since we spent
Well,
the
you've put quite a few in there, Dale, so
Well, I have. I keep moving them there, but I have this feeling that there's something that would be totally handy to somebody that is not yet in there. But in case anybody's watching that didn't see this, this was the example of speech to text. And when I set it up, I set it so that it would just keep working, adding each time automatically until you click the stop button. It wasn't that hard. Um, once you had the basic building block, it was really not that hard. Um, and I didn't. everything that needs to happen is happening here in this setup recognition. Um, it's just a function that is calling the WebKit speech recognition. By the way, I think this only works for, it doesn't work in every browser, let's say that. I don't think it works in Firefox. There's probably a variant that would, but this works in Chrome. So dropping this in, and then the rest is just, I did a very simple JavaScript to say, start that thing if it's not already started, and another one to say stop it, but all the activity happens in in that one setup file. So pretty easy to do.
Yeah, thanks for telling me about the browser limitation. That's something that could be researched and fixed, I'm sure.
Yep. And I think there's lots of room to extend this. I would the JavaScript that I had I think is pointing to a particular um, in this case a large text field, and so I've just done this very simply. I think it would be interesting to figure out how to do it so that you could speech to text on any field that you happen to be pointing at in the um, on the form, or being able to do multiples, right? So, uh, so that you could complete a full form just by talking at it, not just. By the way, this speech to text doesn't look like it's as sophisticated, perhaps, as some things, in that I'm not seeing any capitalization, or if you ask for it to type a period, um, it just it, it's a very does a very simple translation. So it could probably be more advanced than it is, but it is cool what it does. All right. Good comment. What else? Did you or anyone else that was on the call happen to see, learn anything that you didn't know about performance tuning? Or maybe I caught up
I
to
learned
you.
some SQL stuff that I didn't know existed. Uh, some of the stat commands that you had there were very interesting.
Um, yeah, it's certainly stuff that I didn't know. So it was a learning adventure for me to understand that. Um, I had one client that had some performance issues. Again, the same one that was reporting. They had a dozen jobs and they all started at 7 a.m. And then amazingly the system was under a performance load. That same client um, came back and asked me about. Um, okay, that's nice in SQL Server Management Studio, but I want to use it in through the Plantain app. Is there any way to get that information if I'm running a query in a grid or in a run SQL action? And I found it, or rather spent an hour and figured out how to do it. But I haven't turned it into an official contribution yet, but I think it's worth looking at. Um, um, I have a SQL query here and let me see if I can find the other thing that I need. Uh, this is what I'm looking for. So I have an entity here in Campfire system debug entries, and Notice that I have a capture today's date right now, and the details of this are that we have well, it's hard to read. Let's get it out where we can read it. So it captured that it had 0 CPU time and 1377 milliseconds elapsed. So the idea of being able to capture some statistics as things are going on, that's what I have done here. So I have a SQL advanced query data source, and this pattern can be used for pretty much anything. So we're setting up some variables and capturing some start times, and then you drop whatever your query, that whatever you really want to accomplish in the middle, and then it does that, and yet still captures all the stuff and puts it into a JSON payload, and then sends it out to, in this case, it has to be, you have to have this thing or you have to create your own, but it's putting all that stuff out into um, uh, a database table, so you could then make variations of your query and get different results, but actually do it and test it under load. So now every time I test this, um, if I'm doing a search, for example, and every time I execute that, we're getting more entries over here into system debug entries. So you wouldn't want to leave that there as an ongoing thing, but you can capture it along the way and wherever you can do an advanced query.
How did you tie that to the search box?
Well, the data source is capturing all the stuff and running my query. So the data source gets done when you filter or search or anything. It always gets run. I've just added a capture in the middle of it, and yet still return the select that you were doing in the first place.
Gotcha. Okay. Sometimes the simple answer is hiding in plain sight there. It's like, oh, it's the data source that's doing it.
Yep. So yeah, and if we were again, this was just all constructed in theory. You could do. I hope when I finally contribute this that you can put whatever your query is here in the middle. So just dropping this template into your query and then um, and putting your SQL in the middle of it will get the capture, and then you can of course export this the definition of this entity from Campfire as well. And so with 5 minutes of work, you should be able to at least be able to capture those things. Now, in my setup so far, I'll just warn, this appears to be accurate. I haven't gotten it to tell me, I haven't stress tested it enough to know if this CPU time thing is returning any value other than 0. So it's supposed to be, but whether or not it actually is, I don't know. Apparently, the messages that are being returned back from, like that you can see within SQL Server Management Studio, are not accessible in T-SQL. So it would have been ideal to be able to grab all those, or the execution plan, and maybe with special permissions on the server, you could get the whole execution plan. And so that would be fun to just capture, and that's an XML structure. You should be able to capture that as XML and store it away. And so you could do analysis on that as well. But I wasn't able to get it to happen with our setup. Hello, Tom.
Good morning. Hey, Dale. How are you? Hi, everybody.
Hey. We are still on first call. Did you bring anything?
No, I took up a lot of your time last week. No, I don't have anything this week.
All right. Um, so a couple of things that I'll just move on again. I don't have a lot prepared this week, so I'm anxious to talk about anything else, but I do have a few things prepared. This in the documentation under configuration entities, I have these topics, and one of them is I think spot on, being able to, and I think I mentioned this last week, the ability to add custom indexes and what you should know about doing that, which ties into that cafe episode that if you start going back and forth either with your own wits or using an assistant, you might decide that you get better performance by adding in or wanting to try an index. And this explains basically, yes, you can do that. You should, if you ever want to delete the table, you might have to delete out your custom indexes, that kind of thing. But this just, the long and the short of this is, yes, we allow additional indexes. Use it at your own, according to what works best in your circumstance. And then two topics that I need to revise. I really went into the cafe episode with the expectation that the whole thing where you have an external system with a short key trying to map that to the standard Plantin app 450 characters, that was going to be a big performance bottleneck. And I never could prove that. There's limited cases where you can't resolve, you can't change the width of a Plantin app field. That would disturb Plantin app. So the 450 is kind of a given. Um, the idea was perhaps we introduce a mapping table that maps to the Plantin app entity by ID and has the short version of the key, that actually matches your external system. So instead of 12 mapping, trying to join a 12 to a 450, which might cause SQL to do a lot of conversion, we were introducing the idea of mapping 12 to 12 and then using the ID of the record to get you to the Plantin app record. But I spent a day trying to get SQL and Plantin app to prove out that I was right, and I wasn't. SQL will always pick the most efficient path, and it's introducing the overhead of a mapping table doesn't makes it so where it's a very close tie in most cases, or it's even a drag to do that. And so my evaluation is unless you have a very specific circumstance, it's better to not do a mapping table. And so while I wrote the documentation before I did that experiment and found that it really doesn't. So I'll probably be updating this to say, yeah, this makes sense, but only in your mileage may vary. How about that? Anyone else have any thoughts about that whole topic, mapping from one key size to another, or any experience with that? I was really interested to see, as I made changes to the conditions of a SQL query, whether or not there was an index there or different indexes or adding a mapping table to see the way that, I mean, if you look in on the SQL execution plan, the way that SQL adapts and just finds the fastest way in the shortest amount of time. It's really quite amazing. I think all this got started because we had a client that was pointing out, hey, I'm seeing some SQL performance issues. Things are getting a little bit slow on my system. And when I ask AI to analyze it, it points to this conversion between a 12-character key and a 450-character key as being inefficient. And so AI was pointing towards, hey, this is not helpful. But aside from actually being able to set the length of the field in a plant and app entity to match any solution around that is just worse than the worse than just SQL figuring it out on its own. Okay. Anyone have performance issues that they're hunting down? Good, move on. Um, this one was a couple of weeks ago, but I don't think we've talked about it. Someone was trying to do a search behavior and be able to get back um, the search things, and it wasn't doing what he expected. We went back and forth a little bit, but this turned out to be a reminder that you can do a search in like with a server request. So in your low code, being able to get back for any particular behavior, you can get the search. But as we got into it, the one of the things that he was saying was when I do this search interactively on the test search button on the search, it works. But when I try and use this server request, it doesn't. And part of the reminder is that the search takes into account your permissions. So if you don't have permissions to the file as an incognito user, then you don't get the files back as part of the search output. So your permissions impact the search. So when you're logged in as a user, let me illustrate a little bit here. Anytime you're able to get to the search window, you're already operating as a administrator. So using this test search button to look for something is pretty much always going to work for you. Although I don't know what system has, why it's not giving me back answers. But anyway, and then you can pick a different data source. And of course, I can't even find a search that works at all. But then if you tried to, behind the scenes, that's running a API call to go get search results. If you try to do that as a server request and you're not logged in, then the permissions apply and you're not going to get anything. So you either have to lower your permissions or set up the behavior to allow. And that was really part of I think it's down here. In the advanced settings, that's where it is. There's this setting, ignore DNN security. So if you really want to allow a particular behavior to return content, even if they're not logged in, you can say ignore security for that behavior, and it will then allow it. And then at the other level would be that you just have to make sure that the search is logged in. If you want to maintain the security, it has to be from a logged in context. So that was kind of an interesting one, I thought, useful to understand what's going on. I've had a couple of these that having to do with rows and coloring and things, and trying to use, if you can possibly get to the newer version that uses classes, it's going to be a lot more stable than anything JavaScript. There's certain conditions that, in this case, he was trying to do the JavaScript wasn't applying when the data was auto refreshed, and then you're trying to fight it in JavaScript and trying to fight it in trying to fight it using the CSS tools that are available is probably a more consistent way to get it done. All right, we already did speech to text. I'm out of stuff. You guys got to start talking.
We're a quiet group this week.
We
I'll
are.
ask a random question. Do I recall that at some point, I know that there's some tokens that they're going to be retired or made obsolete. Is the if token one of those, or is that
Patrick, that depends.
I get it, Meth. I get it.
That was good.
Else, but I don't think that if was going to be part
Okay.
of it.
I just happened to use it today, and I haven't in a long time. It's one of those tokens that I don't use very much, but when I do use it, it's useful.
So no, I have not heard anything about the if token being under consideration for retirement, and here we are in one. So let's just for fun display if not empty. Let's play if.
That's the version I used. Yep, today.
I am not familiar with this one.
Really?
Looks very useful.
Mm-hmm.
We spent like 40 minutes on talking about actions where you set a value and then you have to have another action that sets the value. You set it false and then you have another action that with a conditional that sets the value to true. Can you do it with an if token?
I'd have to think about that.
Are you talking about the discussion from last week, Don?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
There, I did have something.
So, for example, user first name might be empty. So,
Hmm.
well, I want to see what we got here for user first name is empty in this case versus display name. We have a display name, but my first name is empty. So you could base your decision on if it's user first name is what you're testing, and say oh nope, got that backwards.
Yeah.
And then so because my name is empty, I have a fallback to display. But if I had a and that could be true for even for a like if you're trying to address an email to somebody, and uh, if you have a first name and you want it to be friendly, then you say hello Dale. But if not, it would be you'd have to do something else, an alternate greeting or no greeting or something like that. So it's an interesting one, and yeah, it's again, I've heard nothing about anything being removed.
Cool. Okay.
Can it return a usable true or false?
I would think so. Um,
Sorry, again, I'm not familiar with it. I think that would answer Don's question.
Yeah, the conditions here, it says if equal and if display, if not empty. So two different if functions. So with the equal, can you have a condition like expire time greater than time now equals true? Would be an equals.
so what is the but this is comparing two pieces of text.
Right.
So A
Yeah.
equals
So
A.
yeah, I think I've been through this before, wondering whether or not, so you can't do like this the if is it's either the comparison of two equal statements or something exists if it does, if the second one is if this value is here, then do this. If it's not here, then do this. So it's not a
If you
Yeah,
had a
this
conditional
this is not
statement,
ter
if you had a conditional statement of you have a token called expire time. That was what we were talking about last week. So if you have a token called expire time, and then you have a token called
yeah,
well, you have
I'm gonna
the get time function for now, and if you put those two together, the result is a string called true, right? Well, yeah. I mean, if the condition if you write out your token less than um, expired, if your expired time is greater than now, then you're not too late, and if it's less than now, then you're too late. So if the result is if the value is true, then you would put for the second comparator, you would put the word true, and then the if equals would evaluate to true.
um
But what
No,
do you
because
what does it matter?
you're
Yeah.
talking about an evaluation versus a text check. You're trying to talk about evaluating in the first portion, and that's what we're saying you can't do.
Ah,
It's strictly text. Does text equal text? That's it. There's no evaluating.
The tokens you can get tokens to return text, which can then be compared. In this case, this is being evaluated down to 5, and then that is equal, and so we're getting true. But it's pretty limited.
Yeah, but if you just put in like a date greater than another date, that in and of itself doesn't evaluate. That's text.
Right.
got it. Got it. Yes. So you can't set something else. All you're going to get out of this is a true or false.
Right. Yes, in this case, or in the limited case of this display if not empty, you can, if whatever you're doing returns blank, you can get one thing or another. It's really pretty limited use. Trying to recall, uh, we were trying to use that on a conditional. I think so long as it's a condition within an action stack, you could also use a workflow token, which might be an easier way of getting definitively true or false. If you define a workflow with those inputs you're talking about, whether or not things have elapsed and whatever the current date is, maybe that doesn't need to be an input. But if you define a nice workflow that returns true or false and turn that into a workflow token, it would be easy to consume in that conditional and not have to do it in 2 actions, but now you're doing it in a workflow with a workflow token, which is a set of steps all in its
Right.
own. All low code is easy.
So
But you
I'm
do have
looking
to
at
do a
my
couple. Go ahead, sir.
I'm looking at my implementation of that display, not if not empty, and it looks like I'm using it where I'm wrapping it with another token so that I'm evaluating the token going in and then using token params in the conditions. Does that get the evaluation that Ben mentioned? I can paste that to the chat if it would be clearer if I showed it.
I'm happy to explore it if you're so inclined. Finding the chat window reminds me I was able finally to find where they moved the switch to turn off the waiting room. So last week's stress was no longer present. All right, let's see what we have. I try and highlight this thing and there's stuff that gets in the way. All right, here we go.
So what I'm doing there is I have that inside another token, and I'm passing the parameters in of various things to get a default value back. So at least I think, if I remember the way we're doing it, we're evaluating that on the way in to set those token parameters, right?
Ooh. So you could pass in 3 parameters to a custom to this. This is the definition of a custom token.
Right.
Okay, so rather than evaluating it here, let's. Do you have a nice? What did you name this token? Keep
Is MT.
is empty.
And I used MT instead of the word. Just I think I ran into a conflict somewhere of something being defined.
I like it. All right, so we have a definition way, so it's that. And we probably want to evaluate tokens and save and test. So we're but this looks like you're just ending up wrapping our display if not empty.
That's what I was thinking. It seems like the same thing.
It's might be a simpler way to think about it.
Except
than-
this, I think, is backwards.
But I thought
The
that
result,
what Ben was
the
saying
result is
was
backwards.
you're testing. Oh, I see.
Hmm.
Could be, which makes it not just a straight wrapper, but if it's empty, it's getting the no value. If it's something, it's getting the yes value. So
yeah, but I thought Ben's comment was that you weren't able to like put something in there to be a value. You were just getting the text. And that and I was
What
wondering if that
I think when you were saying that you were uh you were saying this is greater than that, which is a type the type this token is greater than this token or something like that, which is the type of thing you'd put into a condition field. And that's the kind of evaluation that Ben was saying you can't do, that you can't evaluate a Boolean string in the condition here. The condition here is just is the string that you're providing empty or not empty. There's no
Gotcha.
other. It's not looking for a Boolean value in the condition. It's just looking for empty or not empty.
Bingo.
And you were trying to say this is going to be a, trying to evaluate a string. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, this is an old token that goes back, so I don't remember why I was using it this way. So
so this is a 128 system. Between 127 and 128, we completely refactored the token engine. And things that didn't fit the anything that what I'm trying to get to is anything that's been removed, any removals that happened between those two. The fact that if is here in 128 is part of the reason I'm saying it's not going away. We've already brought it forward and it works. There were some things that didn't that there were odd token patterns that odd tokens that had been previously created that didn't fit a standard pattern and also didn't have a strong case for needing to exist. And so those things were eliminated, and that is in the release notes. So, but no, the fact that it's already here tells me that not going away. Cool. What else? Big screen here.
Dale, I have something back on the styling.
Mhm.
So looking to make a form and a list buttons look as close to the same as possible. And so I put the control CSS class in a form button outline primary. And it seems to me to behave differently whether or not I put a semicolon at the end of primary. In other words, it changes color, interestingly enough. So it works like the primary color matches when I don't have a semicolon at the end, and it does not match when I do have a semicolon at the end, which is odd.
So this is within a buttons CSS. This is what we're saying.
Mhm.
So
Correct. The
we'll
UI
find
settings.
yeah. So we
And
have so I have this basic action form with lots of buttons, and
Mhm.
on any given button,
Yep.
the UI settings you have.
Control CS in the control CSS class, yep,
Mhm.
is button btn dash outline dash primary.
Is it all lowercase?
Yep.
So I save that and refresh. This was the submit button that we were working with. And
Huh.
so now we're seeing a different behavior out of it. It's going to, so apparently it
Oh,
did
what?
something.
I'm sorry. What's the what's the button setup like itself? In other words, for the drop down button type. Yeah, say leave that as default unchecked. Yeah. Yep, for selection. Okay. So that more or less will match what you have if you were doing a listing and using the button outline, which I use a fair amount. So now if you go back and to the same thing and change that button and simply add a semicolon, I want to see what happens in your case. No. Yep. See if that color changes.
I'm doing all this and I'm thinking Mark would say, wouldn't it be nice if that was just left open? Yeah, we have a
Your
different
color.
color.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally
Okay.
different behavior. Okay.
All right. So in my case, and I think in yours, it picks up the proper default, uh, the proper color when you do not have a semicolon at the end.
So I see we have form group button outline primary semicolon, which I think is and then let's see, then there's button outline primary semicolon. So there's two impacts that were done as a result of putting that class on there, but I don't think that class definitions, typically you don't include a semicolon in a class definition, right? So I'm sorry, which behavior do you think is,
Which is correct.
yeah.
Good question. To your point, for a class, do you put a semicolon at the end?
I don't think when you define a class,
No.
well, and I mean, somebody can ask the experts, but let's see what happens. Copy this element. I'm not even going to ask a question, see what it comes up with.
Okay.
class out looks malformed. So this, we don't stop you. We don't tell you what you should do to provide a class, but
Right.
it shouldn't. Adding semicolon, or you could probably add a lot of things that would make it crazy. But this
Including
is,
a semicolon.
yeah, semicolon definitely has it's impacting what the browser does, but it's not the right format. So
Okay.
I think you're sounds to me like in your circumstance, and I agree. I love to see the part where we're styling things the same way between forms and listings. But the solution is going to be based in not using semicolons and then seeing what you get and trying to even them out after that.
Mm-hmm. Thank
Uh,
you.
sure. I love it. Is there interest in following that one a little bit farther? Seeing,
Can I ask you a question? The
sure.
button you had set up before you deleted your code and what were you doing there? I was interested. You were using some sort of token to get a color or something?
Oh, yeah, I removed something and I didn't even stop to even think what it was, but I had a style here. But styles do support tokens, so you could uh, you could color things differently based on something else that's the way the form
Happening.
is in. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
and in the same way you can pass classes in. So you could do button outline primary plus uh, get extra. So this would come off the query string. So if we now we're back to in theory to the way it's supposed to be, but we could add a class, which if you defined it, ooh, there is a class defined with that one. Who knew? Who knew? So already in the system. So we're seeing um, where did that go? Oh, yeah, here it is. So button outline primary plus XYZZY, and I assume there's a definition of that someplace that it why. Oh, there it is. So that it picked up aquamarine because I previously had a portal level class present on that. So you could do things dynamically, whether it's from the query string or the logic of the form develops a hidden field that you then point to in the class. You kind of a neat dynamic. So, yep,
Thank you.
absolutely. Long ago, those didn't support tokens, and so you could hard code. Where is this? Oh, you could hard code UI settings, and then since I've been around here, we added just doing a token expansion. It's a small thing, but it adds a lot of capability. So I guess we don't really have time to fully explore it, but are you finding that you're able to make the buttons between grid and listings look the same? Grids and
Yeah.
form?
Yeah, I got there and pretty much. But when I put a semicolon and it changed color, I was like, okay, what am I doing wrong here?
You know, when you go to the doctor and you say, when I drink my coffee, I get a pain in my eye, and
Yeah.
he says, when I raise my arm, don't do that. So,
No more coffee.
well, and you have to take the spoon out of the cup.
Take
But
the spoon out. That's right.
um, but Yeah, this whole topic of consistency between our modules is another good one that, and I think there's probably a feature request that reminds us of this, but things like in listings where you have buttons that you can have a confirmation dialog that pops out and says, "Do you really want to do this?" And that we don't have something similar to that in forms. That's an unfortunate. But I'd love to see more alignment. I think Patrick, you've commented on that before as well.
Yes, definitely.
All right. We've made it 56 minutes in, so I'm going to go to last call. There's still time for something to talk about, but if not, we will wrap it up.
I have something, and since time is short, I would be pleased with just a high-level comment answer. I have a
Well, some of these
list.
people around here are high level, so you might get that.
Okay. I have a list of photo thumbnails. I want to present them to a user and in a list, visible thumbnails. And I want them to be able to check yes or no, something like a checkbox or maybe two checkboxes next to each photo, one for yes, one for no. I'm thinking about how to accomplish presenting that. My first thought is always a grid, but then I need the interactivity. So what ideas do we have for this?
Well, in Forms 2.0, the repeater field would probably get you there.
Yeah, I was going to send you a message saying, I need that repeater.
So if you know the number in advance, you could probably use a dynamic field in a form. So if you had but it would be complex, not to say you couldn't do it, but being able to add a field and I mean a static text to display it plus checkboxes to for your yeses and nos or whatever. So you're adding three things to the form on the way in. Had you thought about trying to use dynamic?
Yeah, that is actually an appealing option because on some of those cases, if they were to choose no, then I would want to run some actions, including sending emails and stuff. So a dynamic form would have the ability to run those buttons, but I mean, run a stack of actions as if it were a button. But I think I could accomplish that in a grid as well with grid buttons.
Grids. Oh. Do they need to show in any? Well, it doesn't matter. I have done something before with grid buttons that when you click the button, it changes the underlying value, and then you actually have two buttons, a yes button and a no button, and you hide one or the other. They're opposing conditions. So the result is that when you click the button, it changes from a yes button to a no button, and
Oh,
visually.
okay.
Have you seen that one before?
Yeah,
That
I think I have. And a related thing might be there could be the yes and the no, and then alongside it, there could be something that looks like a checkbox, even though it's not a functioning checkbox. It could be like an image.
that could be on the button even.
Yeah. Mhm.
So yeah, then as you click it, it gets one image or the other,
Mhm.
and yeah, so that being able to swap in and out a button is really quite easy. I'm trying to. I have an example of that. If you want to see it, we can perhaps even do it in the afterglow. But yeah, those would be starting spots. Anyone else?
Yeah, along those lines, you could do You could actually do, if you wanted to keep the yes and no on there, you could do 2 yes buttons and 2 no buttons and just change the style of the button. You know, make the if it's positive yes, then make it a filled in button, and if it's and no is it's an outline button, and then swap them. If they're no, then you make the no button a filled in button, and the yes button is an outline button. That would be like a toggle thing that you could do,
Mhm.
and I think that would be a pretty user friendly
That's a good
interface.
idea. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I actually do the same sort of approach, Patrick and Mark. When I'm selecting or deselecting, in this case, a category, the green solid success button means it's included, outline red means it's not included, and then the logic in there is just, swaps them around, display, not display.
Yeah.
I think it occurs to me too that you could do it just in single buttons as well with style, with the ability to style things dynamically. I think you could get there.
Mhm.
Just have a different style on the row and apply it to the button. So,
Hmm.
all right, good question. And I think you did
Thanks.
get high level answers.
Yes, that's what I'm. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
All right, another fully successful episode of Low-Code Campfire, success being defined by we got through it. Hang around for a little bit more. We'll do Afterglow, but thanks for joining, and if not, we'll see you next week.